The humid Louisiana air hung heavy over Robert G. Cole High School as a convoy of black SUVs pulled into the familiar parking lot. The asphalt, cracked from years of scorching summers and sudden downpours, seemed to whisper stories of the past. Shaquille O'Neal stepped out of the lead vehicle, his imposing 7-1 frame casting a long shadow across the grounds where his basketball dreams first took flight. The school looked smaller than he remembered, the brick walls weathered by time, the gymnasium, doors bearing the same faded green paint from his teenage years. Students pressed against classroom windows, their phones capturing every moment as the NBA legend walked the same path he'd traveled as an awkward 15-year-old with size 22 feet and dreams bigger than his small-town reality. "Man, this place hasn't changed a bit," Shaq murmured to his assistant, his voice carrying a mix of nostalgia and nervous anticipation. The familiar scent of cafeteria food and floor wax transported him back to 1989, when he was just Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal, a kid from Newark, New Jersey, trying to find his place in Louisiana after his family's military relocation. Principal Martinez, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, greeted him at the entrance. "Mr. O'Neal, welcome back to Cole High." The entire school is buzzing with excitement. As they walked through the hallways lined with trophy cases and student artwork, Shaq's eyes searched for familiar faces among the faculty. Teachers, who remembered him as a gentle giant with a quick smile, waved enthusiastically. The current basketball team, dressed in their practice uniforms, stood in respectful formation near the gym entrance. "Is he here?" Shaq asked quietly, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by something more vulnerable. "Coach Brown is waiting in his old office," Principal Martinez replied softly. "He doesn't know you're coming. We wanted it to be a surprise." The gymnasium doors opened, revealing the court where Shaq had dominated high school basketball, leading the Cougars to a 68-1 record during his time there. The bleachers were packed with current students, former teammates, community members, and local media. But Shaq's attention was fixed on a single figure sitting quietly in the front row. Coach Dale Brown, not the famous LSU coach, but the high school mentor who shared the same name, sat with his hands folded, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing a simple polo shirt and khakis. At 78 years old, he looked frail compared to the commanding presence Shaq remembered, but his eyes still held the same intensity that had seen potential in a scared teenager 34 years ago. The crowd erupted as Shaq entered, but he barely heard the applause. His focus was entirely on the man who had changed his life, the man who had seen beyond his size to nurture his character. Memories flooded back, late-night conversations in this very gym, lessons about respect and responsibility, and the unwavering belief of a coach who treated him like a son when his own father was absent. Coach Brown looked up, and their eyes met across the crowded gymnasium. Time seemed to stop as recognition dawned on the elderly man's face, followed immediately by tears that he couldn't hold back. "Coach," Shaq whispered, though his voice carried across the silent gym. The two men stood, separated by 30 years and a lifetime of experiences, but connected by an unbreakable bond forged in this very place. The gymnasium fell silent as Shaq approached his former coach. Each step echoed off the walls, the same walls that had witnessed countless hours of practice, discipline, and life lessons that extended far beyond basketball. Coach Brown rose slowly from his seat, his weathered hands gripping the bleacher for support. "My boy," Coach Brown said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Look at you." The embrace that followed was witnessed by hundreds, but it felt intimate and private. Shaq, who had hugged celebrities, presidents, and fellow athletes, had never felt an embrace quite like this one. Coach Brown's arms barely reached around Shaq's enormous frame, but the warmth and love conveyed were immeasurable. "Coach, you look exactly the same," Shaq said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Time had aged them both, but the connection remained timeless. Principal Martinez approached with a microphone, but Shaq waved it away initially. He wanted this moment to breathe, to let the emotion settle. Before addressing the crowd, Coach Brown wiped his eyes with a handkerchief, the same pocket-square habit Shaq remembered from their playing days. "You know," Coach Brown said, his voice gaining strength, "I always knew you'd come back. Not as Shaquille O'Neal the superstar, but as the young man I raised in this gymnasium." The crowd leaned in, hanging on every word. Current players sat mesmerized, witnessing a masterclass in mentorship and gratitude. Former teammates, now in their 40s and 50s, nodded knowingly. They remembered the special relationship between their gentle giant teammate and the coach who demanded excellence with love. Shaq finally accepted the microphone, but before speaking to the crowd, he turned to Coach Brown. "Coach, do you remember what you told me my junior year when I wanted to quit?" Coach Brown's eyes sparkled with memory. "I told you that your size was a gift, but your character would determine how you used that gift. Basketball would end someday, but the man you became would last forever." "And you were right," Shaq replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I achieved, every championship, every business success, it all started with the foundation you built in me right here." The gymnasium erupted in applause, but Shaq held up his hand for quiet. He had more to say, and the most important part was yet to come. "Ladies and gentlemen," Shaq addressed the crowd, "you're looking at a man who could have had any coaching job in America. Colleges recruited him. Professional teams wanted him. But Coach Brown chose to stay right here, in this school, with kids who needed him most. He chose to shape lives instead of chase fame." Coach Brown shifted uncomfortably in his seat, never one to enjoy the spotlight. But Shaq continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "This man saw something in a scared kid from Newark. Not just basketball talent, but potential. He stayed after practice to work on my footwork. He drove me home. When my mom was working late shifts, he taught me that respect isn't given. It's earned. And most importantly, he showed me that success without character is just emptiness." The crowd was completely still now, absorbing every word. In the back of the gymnasium, an elderly woman wiped tears from her eyes. Mrs. O'Neal, Shaq's mother, who had flown in secretly for this moment. "Coach Brown didn't just coach basketball," Shaq continued. "He coached life, and today, 34 years later, I'm still using the plays he taught me. Not on the court, but in boardrooms, in my community work, and in raising my own children." As Shaq spoke, the weight of those formative years settled over the gymnasium like a warm blanket. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something sacred. The acknowledgement of a debt that could never truly be repaid, but would be honored forever. The energy in the gymnasium shifted as Shaq set down the microphone and pulled up a chair next to Coach Brown. What followed was an impromptu conversation that felt like a masterclass in mentorship, witnessed by an entire community. "Tell them about the first time you saw me play, Coach," Shaq said with a grin that transported everyone back to his teenage years. Coach Brown chuckled, his voice growing steadier as he fell into familiar storytelling rhythm. "This kid shows up to tryouts, and I mean shows up. 6'10", maybe 250 pounds, but moving like he was afraid of his own shadow. Other kids were intimidated just looking at him, but I could see he was more scared than anyone else in that gym." The current Cole High basketball team leaned forward, captivated. Their coach, a former player under Coach Brown, nodded encouragingly from the sideline. "First drill was suicide runs," Coach Brown continued. "Shaq finished dead last, but he finished. Every single rep. Other kids were cutting corners, but not him. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about size. This was about heart. You made me run those drills for months," Shaq laughed. "I thought you were trying to kill me." "I was trying to save you," Coach Brown replied, his tone becoming more serious. "You see, Shaq came to us during a difficult time. New school, new state, trying to fit in somewhere he'd never been before. Basketball was just the vehicle. What we were really building was confidence, discipline, and character." Mrs. Rodriguez, a teacher who had been at the school for 40 years, stood up from the crowd. "Coach and Brown, tell them about the homework rule." Shaq's eyes lit up. "Oh man, the homework rule." Coach Brown smiled. "No practice if your homework wasn't done. No exceptions. Didn't matter if you were our star player or the last man on the bench. Education came first. Always. I hated that rule, Shaq admitted to the crowd. But you know what? It taught me that everything in life is connected. Discipline in the classroom translated to discipline on the court. Respect for my teachers meant respect for my teammates. Coach Brown didn't just want us to be good basketball players, he wanted us to be good men. A current player raised his hand tentatively. Mr. O'Neal, what was the hardest lesson Coach Brown taught you? Shaq looked at his former mentor, then back at the young man. Humility. I remember my senior year. We were undefeated, heading to state championships. I was getting recruited by every major college, and my head was getting pretty big. After one particular game where I showboated a little too much, Coach Brown pulled me aside. What did he say? The student pressed. Coach Brown answered for him. I told him that talent without humility is just arrogance in uniform. I said, son, you can dunk on anyone in this state, but can you lift up your teammates? Can you make everyone around you better? That's what real champions do. That conversation changed everything, Shaq said. From that moment, I started focusing on assists as much as points, on helping my teammates shine. It's a lesson that served me throughout my NBA career and beyond. The conversation continued for another hour, with stories flowing naturally between the two men. They talked about game-winning shots and crucial losses, about family struggles and personal triumphs, about dreams deferred and goals achieved. The audience, students, teachers, parents, and community members sat transfixed, witnessing a relationship that transcended sports. You know what I'm most proud of? Coach Brown said as the conversation began to wind down. It's not the state championship we won with Shaq, though that was special. It's the man he became. Every time I see him on television, every business venture, every charitable endeavor, I see the lessons we worked on right here in this gymnasium. And I see the teacher who never gave up on me, Shaq replied. Even when I made mistakes, even when I was stubborn, even when I thought I knew better than everyone else. The gymnasium erupted in sustained applause, but both men seemed almost surprised by the sound. They had been so engrossed in their conversation that they'd forgotten about their audience. There's one more thing I need to do, Coach, Shaq said, standing up and reaching into his jacket pocket. Something I've been planning for a very long time. The crowd sensed something significant was about to happen. Cameras focused, phones were raised, and everyone leaned forward in anticipation. But nothing could have prepared them for what came next. The gymnasium fell into complete silence as Shaq reached into his inner jacket pocket. His hands, which had palmed basketballs with ease for decades, trembled slightly as he withdrew a small, wrapped package. Coach Brown looked puzzled, his weathered face showing curiosity mixed with concern. Coach, Shaq began, his voice catching slightly, you gave me something 34 years ago that I've carried with me every single day since. Today, I want to give you something back. He handed the small package to Coach Brown, whose arthritic fingers worked slowly to unwrap it. Inside was a simple wooden box, polished to a warm shine. Coach Brown opened it carefully, and his breath caught in his throat. Nestled in blue velvet was a key, not ornate or flashy, just a simple house key attached to a small tag that read, Home. Coach, Shaq said, his voice now strong and clear, remember the apartment above Mrs. Patterson's garage where you lived when I was in high school? You never owned your own home because you spent everything you had on us kids, buying us equipment, paying for team dinners, making sure no one went without. Coach Brown's hand shook as he held the key. Around the gymnasium, people began to understand what was happening, and the emotional weight of the moment settled over everyone like a warm blanket. Last year, I found out you were renting a small room at the Sunset Manor, Shaq continued. A man who gave his entire life to building homes in young people's hearts was living in a single room. That wasn't right. That wasn't fair. Tears were flowing freely now, not just from Coach Brown, but from faces throughout the crowd. Mrs. O'Neal, Shaq's mother, covered her mouth with both hands. Former players wept openly. Current students watched in awe as they witnessed generosity on a scale they'd never imagined. "Coach, that key opens the front door of a house on Magnolia Street, about 2 miles from here. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a front porch with a swing, and a backyard big enough for all the grandkids you've collected over the years to play in." Coach Brown tried to speak but couldn't find words. He looked at the key, then at Shaq, then back at the key, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. "But that's not all," Shaq said, pulling out an envelope. "This house isn't just a gift. It's yours, free and clear. No mortgage, no rent, no worries. The taxes are paid for the next 20 years. There's money set up for maintenance, utilities, everything you need." The gymnasium erupted. Students cheered, teachers sobbed, and grown men who hadn't cried in years found themselves wiping their eyes. But Shaq wasn't finished. "See, Coach, you taught me that success isn't about what you accumulate. It's about what you contribute. You contributed to hundreds of young lives over 4 decades. You made men out of boys, not just on my team, but every team you coached. You deserve to spend your goldens years in comfort, surrounded by the love you gave so freely to all of us." Coach Brown finally found his voice, though it was barely a whisper. "Son, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, Coach. You already said it all 34 years ago when you believed in a scared kid who just needed someone to see his potential." The elderly coach stood slowly, his legs unsteady, and embraced Shaq once more. This time the hug lasted longer, and everyone in the gymnasium understood they were witnessing something sacred, the completion of a circle that had begun decades earlier in this very place. "There's one more thing," Shaq said, stepping back from the embrace. "The house comes with one condition." Coach Brown looked up, worried. "Every Sunday you have to cook dinner for any of your former players who want to visit. I've already talked to the guys from my team, and we're planning to be regular visitors. That house isn't just your home. It's going to be a gathering place for the family you created." At this, the crowd could no longer contain their emotions. The applause was thunderous, mixed with cheers, sobs, and expressions of joy that seemed to lift the very roof of the gymnasium. Local news cameras captured every moment, but this wasn't about publicity. This was about love, gratitude, and the power of a mentor's influence extending across decades. Principal Martinez stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. "In 40 years of education, I have never witnessed anything like this. Coach Brown, you represent the very best of what teachers and coaches can be. And Shaq, you've shown us what it means to honor those who shaped us." As the ceremony drew to a close, Coach Brown insisted on having the final word. Standing at the microphone, his voice was clear and strong, the voice of a man who had spent his life inspiring others. "Young people," he said, addressing the current students, "what you've witnessed today isn't about money or fame. It's about relationships. It's about remembering where you came from and who helped you get where you're going. Shaq didn't have to do this. He chose to do this because somewhere along the way, he learned that the greatest victories in life aren't scored on scoreboards. They're written in the hearts of people who matter to you." He held up the key one more time. "This key doesn't just open a house. It opens a new chapter in my life, one filled with visits from young men I'm proud to call my sons, and new memories to add to a lifetime of treasures." As the crowd began to disperse, Shaq and Coach Brown sat together on the bleachers one last time, surrounded by former teammates and current players. The Louisiana sun was setting through the gymnasium windows, casting long shadows across the court where it all began. "Coach," Shaq said quietly, "thank you for making me the man I am today." "Thank you, son," Coach Brown replied, "for making me proud every single day since you left here." In that moment, everyone present understood they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just an act of generosity, but a masterclass in gratitude, humility, and the enduring power of mentorship. The story would be told and retold, not just in Louisiana, but around the world, reminding everyone that the greatest gifts we can give aren't material things, but recognition of those who believed in us when we needed it most. The key to Coach Brown's new home would open more than just a front door. It would open hearts, inspire others to honor their mentors, and prove that some relationships are so powerful they can change the world, one grateful heart at a time.